Mother, hi.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
What?
What is this? A photo shoot?
No. Remember the email I sent you about
Yes.
the gentleman who's doing the project?
Oh, hi.
This is-
Hi,
How are you
Angie.
doing?
I'm well. How are you?
to
Nice
meet
to meet you.
That's all. I just didn't want you to come out here and try to have a full conversation with me, like you're notorious for doing.
I wasn't even looking for you. I'm looking for Jerome.
Okay.
Okay.
These-
Well, I'm there. I just have to finish your service.
Well, you can come out here and you can say some words too if you want to.
Really?
Yeah, definitely. Look, we can get the interview done while everybody's here.
Not on Anthony's segment. Can you pull out your other side of your collar? Runs down and runs up.
Thank you, Mother.
I'm sorry, like I don't.
You're set up. You
Yeah.
tried to set me up.
No,
That's
I
fine.
didn't, but I'm the wrong person to do that. So I probably should have somebody here, like looking for those little details.
This is why you need an assistant.
And it has to be what I'd like for you to do for me is just introduce yourself and give me the rundown on your background.
That is an incredibly broad question.
I know. You can start from, where your family came from, how you guys got to LA, when you got to, what do you remember about growing up in LA? Think about it in the time-wise.
Sure.
Beyond you, you gotta think about from the oldest parent that you know down to right now.
That's a lot. Okay. There's
Okay,
just a
so
lot going
I
on.
start off with this. Let me be more direct with the questions.
Yes, because you literally, I'm like, where can I begin? Like, literally.
All right, back to what we were saying. So
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, you actually had a pointed question, and
you were introducing yourself.
Yes.
And you were just.
they call me Hove. No, I'm kidding. No, in realness. My name is Anthony Mecca. I grew up in Omaha. I didn't grow up. I was born in Omaha, Nebraska, and we moved to Los Angeles when we were in grade school. And all my extended family is still in Omaha, Nebraska. So yes, contrary to popular belief, there are 5 black people there. Because the first question I get when I say that I was born in Nebraska is, are there black people in Nebraska? Yes, there are. There are 5 of them. And I know all of them. All my extended family still lives in Nebraska. Only my immediate family's here in Los Angeles. And the big reason why my mom left Omaha was because she was tired of the racism and sexism and discrimination that had existed, that she experienced. And I believe the straw that broke the camel's back, she was working for Mutual of Omaha, the big insurance company. And I don't know the exact story. I remember her telling me the story, and I'm sure when you engage with her, she'll tell you the story. But I remember there was some experience where she was like, F this, I'm not doing this anymore. And she kind of just like walked off her job. It's what I remember, or it could be a dramatization of that. But I remember her being like, I'm not doing this anymore. And so one of her cousins, I believe, they were driving to LA. And so they ended up out here in LA. I don't know what year that was. I was young. But we stayed with my grandmother. My mother asked my grandmother to keep us for a little while until she got to LA, got situated, and all that jazz, because she's moving out of the Midwest in the small city to go to a big, real city with a lot going on. And so I don't, again, the specifics I don't know, but I know she came here with her cousin. Unfortunately, I do know her cousin ended up being murdered. I don't know if it was drugs or gangs, but there was some bad situation where he ended up getting caught up in, and she ended up just figuring it out. And for some reason, throughout the duration of that time, I never felt like my mom was gone. Maybe because we talked every day on the phone. She called my brother and I, and she would always send us, I remember waiting every 2 weeks because she'd send these huge UPS boxes of clothes and things for me and my brother. And so every Friday we'd be sitting like, let's wait for the UPS. So we knew we were getting clothes and things. And she'd always show up in Nebraska as well whenever she, had the time. Again, because she was just like, I need to figure this out before bringing you two out here with me. My younger brother at the time, 2 years younger than me. And that went on for, my mom says it was almost 3 years, but it didn't feel like 3 years. It literally kind of just felt like, it was just a little bit of time that passed, and then she was in Nebraska, and we were, getting on the plane to go to LA, and there's this horrible story that both her and my brother will tell you, because apparently when we got on the plane, I'm a very emotional person, and we were walking. This is before 9/11, and you could go in the airports, and your family could be at the gate with you and wave you off and all that jazz. And apparently, we were walking down. We just I don't even know what it's called, but we were walking towards the airplane after we got our tickets checked, and I started crying, like started bawling, and my mom was of course like, "What is wrong? What is going on?" And I said something to the effect of, "I don't want to leave my family." And she says, "We are your family." And my little brother was like, "Come on, let's go." So there was just like this it was kind of a pivotal moment for me, like in retrospect, because it was kind of the shedding of an old previous life I had. Granted, I was in grade school at this point, and really embarking on what would become the life that I have now in Los Angeles, that has offered so many different opportunities that I don't think I would have had the opportunity to experience having lived in Nebraska. So, again, came to LA. We wound up here in the Valley. My mother enrolled us in some magnet schools, again, being the sole black person or two or three of us. And it's funny, I don't remember seeing a lot of black women in my classes. I always remember black men. I don't remember any, or black girls. And I remember black boys. I don't remember seeing the girls there. I knew I was always me and at least one other black boy. And it was just always an experience, like as I shared with you. It was being different, it was, I wasn't being bussed in from Los Angeles. I lived right here in the Valley, and not that there was anything wrong with being bussed in, but it was just always an experience, and not necessarily having to prove myself, but always feeling different. And maybe that was self-imposed, I was black. I grew up in the Valley. I knew I talked differently than people. I also knew I was gay, whether that was something I was able to admit at that point. It was always there. And so maybe it was self-imposed, but it was definitely an experience that continued, from elementary school through middle school, even through high school. Hell, even to this day sometimes it's just like, oh, are you engaging with me this way because I'm black, because I'm gay, because I'm at the intersection of both, or because I'm just different? Or because I don't know. It could be a whole bunch of things, right? Like we have various identities that we very much embody on a regular basis, and it's a matter of, how are people engaging with you today? What does that mean? I'm just rambling on at this point, so I'm gonna stop.
No. So you said some really good things that kind of just inspired some thought in me. One of them was, could you tell me a little bit about your family in Omaha, Nebraska, and how far back can you remember, or how far back can you trace them? And also, what were some of the traditions that you guys have in Omaha? Because that's a very interesting place to be from as an African American.
So, you asked like 17 questions in one, so let's start with one. I'm gonna ask you to repeat those. I totally forgot all of them already. What is my family like back in Nebraska? So my mom is one of 9 children, 7 that are living, and my mom is the oldest girl, and she's the 3rd oldest overall. And at least with that nuclear family, unfortunately, it just seemed the stories my mother shared with me have been very toxic, and largely because my grandfather was an alcoholic and was abusive emotionally and physically to my grandmother as well as their children. So there are things that my mother still doesn't do as an adult because of the experiences that she had as a child growing up in that environment. And it's funny because sometimes as you get older and you become an adult and you see your parents, you're like, oh, they're adults, they're humans, just like me. We make mistakes, we do things, we have our idiosyncrasies, like whatever the case may be. And one of the things that stuck with me, my mother has always been adamant about, not adamant, maybe that's the wrong word, but she's never been that much of a cook, which is goes against the grain of like the traditional stereotypical mother-woman role of cooking. But my mother was a single mother, so she's the only parent that we had. So if she didn't cook, what are we doing? And I learned probably about 4 or 5 years ago, one of the reasons she doesn't like cooking is because when she was growing up in this toxic environment with my grandparents, is that my grandfather, because she was the oldest girl, used to force her to stand over the stove while things were cooking. And not just steaming or boiling, but they were frying and they were grilling. And so she would get popped by the grease and things while standing over the stove. And so as a result, my mother, to this day, does not enjoy cooking. I mean, she will cook, but it's not her pedigree of things she enjoys doing. But it was one of those moments and one of those things where I'm just like, we oftentimes underestimate how our childhood very much impacts us for the rest of our life, essentially. You know, my mother's an adult woman with 3 grown children at this point, and she's still very much reeling and experiencing kind of the pain from that experience from her childhood. So that was like, I think, largely defines the environment I think that my mother grew up in. I didn't grow up in that environment at all, but that was definitely largely her environment. She's the only person of her siblings that have left Omaha, so we are the only folks outside of Nebraska. So that's always created us a little bit of a divide between us and them, and projections both ways about who we each think we are and what we think we are. My grandmother, maternal grandmother, she is also one of 9 children. I can't even tell you how many of them are still living. It may be down to about 4 or 5 at this rate. But like my mother, my grandmother is the eldest girl. And I think that's why my mother and my grandmother are so close. And she is, I think she too is either the 3rd or the 4th. So they kind of have that same bio as it relates to just like succession of children. So I do think that is one reason why, because both my mother and grandmother are very close. They were just here in August, actually, staying here. My paternal side, I didn't know them very well. My paternal grandfather, had passed away before I was born. And my maternal grandmother, we had a relationship. We developed a relationship as I got older. My mother had a really good relationship with her. But yes, you're gonna press pause. Okay.
It tells you.
Okay, I don't know where we were.
Oh, so you were talking about your grandma.
Oh, so my paternal grandmother, it's not weird. It's just, I didn't have a relationship with my father, who is also now passed. But my mother had a relationship with her because my mother and my father were high school sweethearts. And so their families, again, growing up in the time that they did, in the city that they did, which was what we would consider probably a small city or even a town, their families knew each other. And she knew their siblings and he knew her siblings and all that jazz. But his father had passed away before he was an adult and before I was born. So I never got the chance to meet my paternal grandfather. But my paternal grandmother was around. I remember going and hanging out with her. My mom also said she used to drop me and my brother off at her place when her mother didn't want to babysit. And she said the only thing that would keep me there is she would put on Little Shop of Horrors, the movie, with Rick Moranis. Which I'm like, I do really love that movie. Even as an adult, I'm like, this is an amazing movie. And apparently that was the only thing that would keep me quiet and distracted for hours on end. So again, I had that relationship with her, I think, as a child. And then as we kind of came of age as a teenager, it really didn't happen because, again, we were in LA at this point and they were also in Nebraska. And it wasn't until, jumping far in my story, it wasn't until I was an undergrad at Berkeley that I did an exchange program in DC and realized that she was living outside of Reading with an uncle of mine. And so I had spent a couple weekends with her while coming up from DC to go see her and had this really incredible experience. which is great. There's several times that we saw and got to hang out, and I do remember just one of those moments while seeing her. She had this photo album, and because all of our grandparents love some good photos, and I remember flipping through the album. And I'm like, Grandma, how do you have this picture of me? And she's like, that's not you, that's your father. Because my father and I are literally identical. Like, we looked exactly alike. And it was actually kind of eerie seeing him when, we did have the little bit of a relationship that we had. It was kind of scary being like, oh my gosh, like, I know what I'm going to look like when I am older. Which is really weird. So, going back to my paternal family, my father was one of 5. He had one sister who was the eldest, Aunt Vicky. She was thebomb.com. She unfortunately passed away from cancer. My father, too, passed away from cancer, which is really kind of scary as well. And my paternal grandmother passed away when I was in undergrad as well, and she had a heart attack. And that was really rough. It was great to have known her and the experiences that we did have. I do cherish those moments and cherish those memories. It was also still very weird because it's like, why didn't I do this earlier? It's hindsight. Hindsight's always 20/20, and it was rough. It was sad. And I know my mother took it a little harder than I did because my mother had a relationship with her and maintained that relationship with her. And not that I didn't maintain the relationship, I didn't know where to begin because I was a teenager, I was a child, and it wasn't until I became an actual young adult that I saw and understood the value of having a relationship with her. And so she was part of my life. She was part of my life after, seeing her and engaging with her a few times while they were outside of Philly in Reading, random backwater city outside of Philadelphia. Don't go. There's nothing there. So that's kind of my family. My grandfather, who my maternal grandmother married, who was abusive, was not my mother's biological father. He was the man who raised my mother. And her father lives in Ohio. Guys, I feel like this is going to be recorded. I don't know if I should be sharing. I'm sharing all kinds of family history and secrets with you. My mother will get more into the details of her story and him because I actually don't know, but I do know who her father is. And my mother, this is going to sound really weird. So there are 9 of them. The first 2 sons have the same father. My mother has one father, and then the others have one father. So my mother is kind of the only product of my grandmother and my grandfather. So, which also potentially adds to this situation of you all are different, we all are different, etc., etc. But both of my grandmothers are from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Both of them. And they did not know each other while in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And our families became acquainted when my mother and my father became acquainted, which is really weird. My grandfather, again, not my biological grandfather, but my grandfather, the man who raised my mother and my other aunts and uncles, he's from Mississippi. So it's just like, y'all some southern mofos. Like through and through. And as I shared with you earlier, my grandmother has a 9th grade education. She never finished high school. My maternal grandmother has a 9th grade education, never finished high school. And, she spent time picking cotton on her uncle's farm, which is within our lifetime. My grandmother's still living. My grandmother's still here. My grandmother, again, like I said, was here a couple months ago, visiting us here in our new house. And it's just weird to hear those stories because even I remember when I finished business schools, when I went back to visit them in Nebraska, and I remember being like, why haven't we had this conversation about what a family tree is and who's included, this, that, and the other? It's when I learned that my great-grandmother ended up one of the reasons she left Arkansas was because her husband or boyfriend at the time, some really crazy story, had attempted to sexually assault it was either my grandmother or her sister. And my great-grandmother was like, Ida Mae. She's like, it's not going down like that. And so that's when my great-grandmother, it was this bizarre story of taking the children and moving somewhere and staying with some family for a few months before finally moving up to Nebraska, leaving some of them behind. Again, it's just such a different time. I couldn't even fathom the idea of, having multiple children but not being able to, take all of them and having to fend and protect some of them, knowing that
You
that
know
was
what?
the case.
This is amazing because I've heard a similar story.
100%.
But the story is so odd because it was exactly around the basis of this woman having to have these kids and basically being sent to parents' house to take care of them,
Mm-hmm.
or grandparents' house in another state, and another state that was odd, that
Foreign.
but they all came from the South: Mississippi, Alabama, New Orleans, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, going to places like Michigan, Omaha, Nebraska,
Just
Arkansas.
leaving. Well, there's also historically, some historians would argue that a lot of people who were leaving the South to, get out of Jim Crow era laws and segregation would say that there are lots of families who were trying to go to Chicago because that was the hope at that time, right? It's in the Midwest. It's culturally much more similar than the East or the West. But people ran out of money along the way, is what some people would say. And that's how we have these populations, large populations of black people in various parts of the Midwest that aren't Chicago. Because, what's in Omaha? What's in Kansas that drew large groups of black people there?
Well, I know that somebody else told me that the man would go. So there were so in the South, the men didn't have, people didn't have a lot of job opportunities. So then a lot of times that the able-bodied men in the community would actually go to the North or the Midwest to work in the factories during that time, because this is Industrial Revolution time.
Right.
The women are staying there with the children, but then they're being left with these men who, I guess, this relationship is not necessarily gelling well. So there are some kids produced, and them kids end up having kids in a crazy way that doesn't really stick to the tradition, and then they get sent to live with the family that has been basically waiting to kind of send for them anyway, when they were building up enough income to actually take care of them. I don't know, man. It's
Assuming that the men who left these neighborhoods were also still coming back and still had that commitment. Because sometimes people leave these neighborhoods and they're like, well, that's my past. No one needs to know about that. And then that becomes a whole nother situation, right?
Oh my God.
So, I mean, and again, I'm not a historian in any way, shape, or form, but we do know through our family's histories, through our family's experiences, through friends, that this stuff happened and it was real. And so it's never as simple as it seems. It's always a very complicated, convoluted, complex dynamic. I mean, and we're just talking, that's just family. We're not even talking about all the other exterior things, whether it be racism and discrimination and sexism and sexual assault and physical assault and all that jazz. We're not even talking about that. We're talking about literally just the dynamics between, the agreements made between one human and another human there. And I honestly can't think of any traditions that I would call traditions per se. I mean, when I personally think about a tradition, I think of something that everyone is invested in and engaged in on a regular basis, not something that kind of just happens sporadically because it sounds good. And for a long time, it's going to sound really horrible, it seems as though the only tradition that my family had was getting together when someone died. And that was depressing. Because it's like, that was the time you could not be present. But that served as a tradition, unfortunately. And not a happy one, not a joyful one. I mean, I need to also provide the context that my mother and my grandmother were both raised as Jehovah's Witnesses. So the holidays don't mean anything to us. They have no relevance. I mean, and even to this day, I don't necessarily practice being a Jehovah's Witness at all, but I'm like, why are we celebrating an Easter bunny jumping up and down? Why are we celebrating the genocide of Native Indians here because white people want to call it, again, taking land and calling it their own? You stole, you killed, you slaughtered, you massacred, you fill in the blank, and we're celebrating this. I refuse to be a part of that. How did Christmas go from celebrating the birth of someone to now needing to give gifts to everyone. And again, so it just the practical, financially responsible person to me is like, this actually makes no sense. And understanding that a lot of these holidays are very commercial holidays, it's no coincidence that there's one major holiday every month of the year in the United States. That's not a coincidence. And that major holiday has been completely commercialized in order to generate income for these large companies and corporations and to stimulate the economy. That's not a coincidence. So I know oftentimes a lot of traditions are rooted in holidays and things, and so that's why I bring that up. But I can't think of any traditions. Again, I feel like our families, I don't know. Again, my family also largely grew up poor, and I think still are very poor. You know, I feel like they come here and they're like, you all have made it. I'm like, have we? I mean, it's relative, right? We've made it relative to you, but relative to the greater scheme of life, we good. It's nothing great. It's nothing grandiose. And so even I think even having traditions is somewhat of it's a little bit of a privilege, to be very honest with you. And I don't think my family has been privileged enough to very much engage in certain traditions. You know, there, always traditions around, baby christenings and, again, holidays or even weddings. A lot of that hasn't happened within my family. A lot of my extended aunts and uncles are unwed and multiple children. And that's fine for them, and there's no judgment there, but it's how do you create a tradition around such fragmented aspects of life? And it's hard. And again, there are multiple layers to that. It's not an easy response. It's not an easy solution. But for me, traditions have largely been, it's a very privileged to know that the other aspects of your life are taken care of, and then like, okay, we got this. So now since we have all this together, let's figure out how we can celebrate this or embrace this or move this forward or pass this on or whatever the case may be. The fact that no one else had engaged my grandmother about her family history or her family tree prior to me doing it only a couple years ago as an adult, a 30-plus-year-old adult, it's kind of odd to me. It was weird. I remember I was sitting with my grandparents and a cousin, and we were at it was a buffet. My grandfather loves buffets. He loves buffets. Preferably those with crab and other seafoods, because all Black people love seafood, apparently. But I remember I was just sitting there, and I was just so engaged in the level of like detail that she could offer me about her family history. And it was almost as though she was waiting for someone to ask her about this, because no one had ever done it before. So a long-winded response is, I don't really feel as though we have traditions, like I said, because I think it's largely rooted in privilege. I think one of the traditions that my immediate family here in Los Angeles has developed, this is my first time living in LA as an adult, so I've always been away. And I think one of the big things that we did when I came back, we've always, had a dinner of some kind, inviting potentially family and friends over, or we go out for dinner. During Christmas time, my mother likes to get us gifts and things. Although we don't celebrate the holidays, but my mother also loves to shop. So she's that person who's like, I want to find a good bargain. I want to find a good rate for something. So she'll get it. And so she's oftentimes provided us with gifts and things, but I'm always like, it seems a little weird because I'm not a consumer in that respect. But she likes shopping, and that's like her love language is like giving gifts, And so we appreciate it. We always seem to also go out for her birthday. Whether it's last year the year before we did a brunch at the Queen Mary in Long Beach. And last year we did a dinner over here on Ventura. So there is something around my mother's birthday, because she's kind of the one responsible for all of us. And even sometimes around Mother's Day, again, these artificial holidays that don't mean anything. And there have always been traditions around like graduations and other accomplishments. I mean, growing up, my mother, because we didn't celebrate holidays, she always rewarded us for our academic accomplishments. So we didn't feel like we were being left out, so to speak. So that was also rewarding, and it also seems make a lot more sense. Like, not, oh, it's a day of the week of the year, let me give you a gift. But no, you've done something to deserve this. So here's your gift, or here's a reward. I can't think of many more traditions outside of that.
Oh, that's perfect. I mean, there's no definition for tradition. So, it's not odd to have some or
Sure.
none or a bunch.
Fair.
But you actually have named. Really seemed like the tradition that you did have were really adding positive effects to your personal growth.
Yeah, positive reinforcements. Yeah, for sure.
Definitely.
100%.
That leads me to this question, which I'm going to stop. Directed towards you by other people growing up.
Did I overcome it? Took things into my own hands sometimes. Go ahead, please.
So, what would you say what were the things that you learned in the past and the things that you experienced growing up that you think helped you be able to overcome those things?
That's a big question, largely because there's a lot of different ways to tackle that. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, related to a experience that you feel most closely relates to.
Yeah, see, again, it's a big question because it's so. A part of me doesn't know if that. Let me take a step back. I'll put it into a story to contextualize things for you. Once we moved to LA, again, like I said, it was kind of like this new chapter in life. My brother and I used to have to go back to Nebraska every winter and summer because my mother couldn't afford childcare. Right? For two boys, she's still getting here in LA. So like we go back and it was fine because it was our family. It's not like she felt unsafe. Like she lived there. My grandmother still lives in the same house that she grew up in. They're still there, same place. And when we used to go back is really when I ran into more of the challenge. They were different challenges. Being in school, it was like, okay, you're the different black person, black boy, fine. And this is, elementary and middle school logic. Because I really stopped going back by the time I got to high school. And so that was like one experience. And then once I went to Nebraska, those differences became even more highlighted. They are more pronounced. And they're more pronounced because I'm the eldest male cousin around. Again, my mom's one of 9, 7 living. She's the third eldest overall. I was the first grandchild that was around in the family. So I already kind of had people will call it spoiled. Fine. I'll take it. But I'm not the eldest grandchild. There was actually my cousin Brandy, who's older, but she wasn't raised around my maternal family. She was raised around her maternal family because it was my eldest uncle, his child. So I was the first one around. I bring all that up just to say there was already a difference in that respect for being the eldest, and then to have the age thing as well, and to be from California, or to be living in LA and coming back. So, and to be talking the way that I talked. So there were always these, you sound like a white boy, you're an Oreo, a lot of really hurtful things. They call me a faggot. Like, it was just really, really horrible, hurtful things. And so I started to loathe going back to Nebraska because, again, I'm coming of age at this time, right? So I am no longer a elementary school or a grade school child and we're just like having fun and playing. No, like we're riding our bikes around the corner. We're creating cliques. We're going through puberty where whatever the case may be. A lot of the kids were real hood, doing things that they shouldn't have been doing, But it was during that time, again, it was during one of those summers that I felt there was a little bit of a transition for me. So I stopped hanging out with the kids. I stopped hanging out with my peers. I started hanging out with my grandmother. And we would go and do whatever we did, whether it was walking around the park or going shopping or fixing up one of her rental properties. Or the woman down the street, Miss Brown, Earlene Brown, who lived down the street from my grandmother, we'd sit on the porch because that's what older black people do, and watch the children play in the streets. And there were two other things that happened prior, or I think after that. I actually don't know the sequence, but between hanging out with the adults, then there was also another summer where, because I didn't want to hang out with them anymore, with any of my peers, I got a library card. And I remember going to the library and just getting stacks of books. Just stacks of them. And I would bring them back, and I would make a little tent with a floor fan, put the sheet around it, have the books hold the sheet down, and I would literally just sit inside and read for hours and hours and hours on end. And it was my escape from hanging out with the peers that didn't like me. And I think that also very much opened my mind up into my imagination and to adventure and to journeys and to just learning about things that I may or may not have had the opportunity to learn about, because while my peers were running around, playing games and riding bikes and staying out, and it's summertime, right? It's kids, we're in elementary school, we're in middle school, like the things that kids do. And we grew up, my grandparents live in the hood. It's not this tight, strict space, because there's so many of us. If one person goes missing, 6 people are going missing. You know what I mean? So I think it was that experience that very much, I won't say it propelled, but it definitely, I think, helped ignite the academic rigor in myself, that knowledge, that all that other jazz. Reading is fundamental. And so, again, while my peers, like I say, were running around playing games all summer, I was reading all summer. And I think that very much ended up playing a huge role into who I am today and what I was able to accomplish thereafter. Another summer, or maybe it was the same summer, I don't think it was the same summer because I was too young, but that following summer, I remember getting a job. And my first job was working at a grocery store as a bag boy. I don't know if I was 14 or 15. But that was my job. I got a part-time job because, again, I wanted to escape being with my peers. And I'm like, well, let me do something constructive and productive. So my grandmother talked to the grocery store owner, their local grocery store, Chubb's. Why is it called Chubb's? I don't know. But I think the owner's name is Bob. This is an old white guy. And my grandmother talked to him, and I ended up working there. I don't know if it was that summer, maybe a following summer, but I was working there as a bag boy. And that kept me occupied, and again, working 4 or 5 hours a day over the course of the summer, made my own money. Again, so I think that also started to create this sense of responsibility, not necessarily of adulthood, but just like, hey, I don't have to ask my grandmother or grandparents or aunts or uncles or my mom for money to go buy some chips. I can buy my own burger and fries from the local joint, or buy my own candy at the local store. So yeah, it was, I think those were the things that I did to escape my peers, because I did have a few instances. I remember going back to Nebraska, there were one experience I remember in particular. We used to race around the block on our bikes. We'd get bikes and we'd have 3 or 4 people to a team, and we'd race around the block. And then you hand it off. It's kind of like a relay race on bikes. And I remember being in that experience and coming around like the last quarter of the block. And there were 2 boys on the other street that didn't like me. And I don't remember what the interaction was. I don't know if he said something or he threw something at me or whatever. But I remember getting off the bike and just like hitting this boy in his face several times, to where my cousin ended up pulling me off of him. And then it became an issue, because then, of course, I go back home and their parents are coming over to my grandparents' place, this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. I don't even know if it was directed at me or my cousin, but it was just something to where I'm not an angry person at all. Like, you really have to push me to get there. And I just remember fighting this boy, and then it became an issue with like their parents and my grandparents. But that was the most extreme because I didn't know them. But it wasn't as though my cousins and friends that I was hanging out with weren't doing the same things, but because there was a relationship with there. Not that they got away with it. it just hurt in a different way. It cut in a different way. I don't even know what the purpose of that story was. I think you're asking how I dealt with all that, and I think
Well,
that kind of gets into it.
so there seems to be a key figure, a key theme in this story.
Oh, goodness.
There's someone who helped you. There was you matured fast, but seems like somebody kind of suggested to you, maybe try this. It was like somebody there to kind of guide you and give
Yeah.
you some different direction.
You talking about my grandmother?
Is that the person?
I think about that. Yeah, I do. I think it's for two reasons. I do think my grandmother's had a very in my life, and a large part of that is my grandmother. Again, she was my surrogate mother for several years, so they claim, when I was younger, and so I think that definitely helped. But I know, like I shared before, my grandmother and my mom are very close, and so I felt as though my grandmother saw me and my brother as an extension of my mother, and so she knew that she had to take care of us, because if she didn't, that would be a challenge. I have no idea who that was. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. My grandmother was definitely very protective. I think a large part of me also feels, this is gonna sound really horrible, because I don't think I've ever said this out loud. I don't think I've ever not been gay. And I think it was one of those things where my grandmother, and even my mother as well, were both trying to protect me in a lot of ways, because they knew that I was gay and they knew that I would encounter certain experiences as a result of that. And I think subconsciously, and they will probably never admit to this, but I think subconsciously that was their way of trying to shield me from the hurt and pain and ignorance of other people. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know.
That was great.
Especially in modern times and in media, it's as though my authentic blackness has to be watered down. It has to be safe. It has to be fill in the blank, right? In order for it to be digested by this larger group of people. And James's work isn't that way. He's like, this is blackness in all of its greatness and all of its glory and all of its trials and all of its triumph. And I think that is what I like about him. We're not, he doesn't paint these, ambiguous looking, biracial, potentially passing black people. And there's nothing wrong with those people at all. But again, that's the common image that exists. He's like, no, we are the daughters and sons of Mama Africa, and this is what we look like. Our beautiful, dark, chocolate, smooth, amazing skin, and our broad features, and our full lips, and our hips, and we love bright colors, and we like to eat, and we like hanging out, and we like socializing, we like dancing. That, to me, is kind of the essence of who we are, before it was stripped down, and before it was anything else, and it was a little bit of a tangential point, I'm going to leave it alone because it upsets me a little bit. When we have these conversations about what it means, not even what it means, necessarily, like standards of beauty amongst black people, there's not, specifically women, there's not one non-light-skinned black woman that I can think of in the music industry that has made it huge. There's no big megastar or superstar of a dark-skinned black woman. Perhaps with the exception of Whitney Houston. And because she's amazing, but her voice is also second to none. Was second to none. But there's no other woman who's ever made it huge, high-level, superstar, megastar, that was not a light-skinned woman. And that makes me feel some kind of way. And so when I run into a work like James's work, I'm like, oh, look, they're beautiful people of all shades, more so the melanated shade. I think that's what struck me as something that I'd never seen before, and I think as a result also had a greater appreciation because I saw more of myself in that experience. I don't get to pass as biracial, ambiguous, etc., etc. I am the scary person that people, how they feel very afraid of me because I'm dark-skinned, walking down the street at night. And so I think that's one reason why I like his work so much, because it seems very authentic, without the delusion, without diluting his actual work. And I think that's why I appreciate his work so much.
That's exactly what art is supposed to do. You know, he accomplished that, and he even says that in his bio. That's what he wants to accomplish. So just listening to that is like, I mean, because I saw the work, I thought it was amazing, and I love the way that he paints it. And it's not even like realist. It's kind of abstract, but not really, because it's very proportional.
Yes.
But he stated, man, I wanted to really capture the Black experience, and he focuses a lot in Watts, Los Angeles, because of the community there. You know, that's amazing.
And for the record, there isn't any one Black experience, right?
Right.
But this was just one Black experience that I'd never seen and never experienced, and definitely not portrayed in this manner. No, Blackness, there's as many shades of, colors there are in the world. There are the many experiences of Blackness that exist. Why is my mother yelling? She's on the phone. That's fine. So definitely, Kerry James is definitely one of those artists that moved me in that space.
Oh, that's
And
wonderful.
Frida, I mean, no, I'm never going to the others, but I mean, Frida Kahlo, just because she was just such a, Frida Kahlo was such she's a revolutionary, and I'm always rooting for the underdog in that respect. And she also defied the idea of what traditional, beautiful Mexican women look like. Her infamous unibrow was intentional. It was a statement. It's like, I don't subscribe to this idea that I need to be fair-skinned and thin eyebrows and proportional faces. She captured herself and all her flaws, and that is a beautiful thing to me. To not only capture yourself with those flaws, but to embrace them, the manner in which she did. And then Banksy, because he's political, and I really appreciate that. Down with the system! Down with the system!
Oh man, that's wonderful, man. You know yourself very well. You know yourself very well, and you could you only imagine if, like, there were more representations of people who knew themselves as well as you do, to help other people who are probably young Anthonys and like looking for that inspiration,
One of the big things I constantly grapple with is the lack of direction I feel like I've had most of my life. Granted, yes, I've had adults in my life, like my mother's always been there. It's always been, and that's been great. But it would have been, I think, even more beneficial for me to have an actual formal mentor to be like, hey, you should consider this. You should explore that. Because my mother is my mother. She graduated from high school, but she hasn't had a lot of my experiences. She was raising 2 children. By the time she's my age right now, I'm like, I can barely take care of myself. I don't know how you did it with 2 kids, you know what I mean? And I feel as though if I had someone who could have provided a little bit of that direction, not that my life would be completely different, but I would have been able to experience a little more in a very different way, and potentially sooner, to help, expedite this process of joy and happiness that I constantly see. Because I've had an amazing life. Do not get me wrong. I've had an incredible life. And a large part of that is because I have integrated formal mentors into my life on a regular basis. Whether that be professional or personal, or even social. It's about having others who can provide you insight on things that they've already experienced, that they've already gone through. And if there were more people out there who were able to have that direction and find themselves sooner, not necessarily chasing what other people want us to do, not necessarily chasing what society tells us to do, or giving into the pressures of what social media is projecting, or whatever the case may be, we were being our true authentic selves, we'd be incredibly happier, because no one can do you like you can do you. And that is something I think most people fail to realize. We're so we're so quick to just chase something that doesn't exist or that isn't our own, really, because someone else is doing it. And, you know, it's funny because people are also quick to criticize those people who are living their authentic lives. That's one reason why I think people have such this venomous, vile hate towards celebrities and entertainers who are living their best life, regardless of what that is. You know, they're living their best life, and you're upset because you're not living your best life.
That's a recurring theme. Every person I talk to, if they had support growing up, they were very secure as an adult. If they had little support growing up, they questioned their own self as an adult. And the other shared theme is as a people, we are born into struggle. And since that seems to be a reoccurring theme for all of us, naturally our survival instincts kick in, and we are like that newborn wild animal that can come out of the womb walking,
Right.
because we don't have a choice. And no matter where we end up, it was always that, you know, it was always a struggle to get there. And so I feel like that survival instinct is the same for everybody. But how it expressed itself as you were moving forward in life, it is very, very interesting.
I agree.
You know,
Well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. The things that happen in our childhood have an indelible impression on us and will continue to impact us throughout our adulthood. It will impact the way that we raise our children, the way that we have friendships, the way that we have romantic relationships, the way that we interact with our peers, the way that we find our careers, the way that we deal with our challenges and struggles, and et cetera, et cetera. All of that goes back to childhood. And if something is completely thrown away, it could have some serious implications later on in life, and you don't even necessarily know it until you've actually checked into it.
you don't know it. Well, okay, you do know it. You do know it. You inherently know it. It's a feeling. It's a feeling that haunts you, and because, you know, our community, our society is so throwaway, we can mask it, but it's always there. And so the trick is exploring it, exploring that string. Like, the string is dangling, you can see it, and it's always there. It's very thin. You know, do you touch it? No, most people, they do things to get away from it. But then some people, foolish enough, they pull it, and then they start to follow where it goes. And it does not go to a nice place, because that's
It's uncomfortable.
that's the key of overcoming. It's uncomfortable. Now, I think that, you know, depending upon your survival instinct will either allow you to move through it or to be destroyed by it as soon as you start to see a little bit of what it reveals. And so you do have an inherent feeling that there is something probably missing. You know what I'm saying?
I do agree with you. My pushback is not everyone has the language to articulate that.
No, they
And
don't.
so as a result, it's just like, oh, I have this feeling, and it's just going to be a feeling. And until they're able to articulate it, they're never going to be able to. They can't fully check into it because they don't know how to talk about it.
But ability is based on experience, but you only gain experience by action. So if I don't know how to articulate it, I do know that it's kind of like, again, I keep relaying this because you're completely right. Like, not knowing how to articulate something is just it kind of destroys your ability. How would you want to be portrayed in a portrait?
Fabulous, honey, fabulous. It's a really, I don't even know how to begin that.
Better question,
okay.
clarification. The portrait kind of combines a lot of the story symbology and kind of the motifs of this conversation, like the theme of like who you are, and they're subtly, placed in the portrait.
Sure.
But most importantly, I want to make sure that you're captured in a light that is that heightens your profile. So what I'm most curious about is how you want to be posed. I think of things as examples. Barack Obama's pose is his portrait. Kennedy's pose in his presidential portrait. The Pope in his papal portrait. These people are people in positions of power, and the artists specifically focus on capturing that power in the portrait. I want to take that and I want to infuse that with the stories of the people that I do interviews of, because these people are going to be elevated in positions where they seem powerful enough to inspire someone when they look at the portrait.
That was a fantastic response. I wish I would have just said something like that. I mean, I think the big thing that comes to mind is I just want to be. It almost goes back to kind of how I want to be remembered, and what that means. I think at the end of the day, I just want to be. I want to be human. I want to be authentically, genuinely me, and all that entails—the good, the bad, the flaws and all. Beyonce channeling in me right now. I think I just want to be authentic, and yes, with that comes a lot of other qualities that I can think. Like I said, how I describe myself, whether it's being, driven and ambitious and goofy and funny and honest and principled and compassionate and loving and caring. I just want it to be human. I really don't. I can't think of any other word to describe. Again, yes, the portrait, but even just like the legacy of who I want to be is just to be human.
Could you name somebody who you feel like has portrayed that in their own life?
A few people. Past or present, historical, doesn't matter to you. I mean, one person who I very much admire is James Baldwin. He was rejected by white people because he was black, and rejected by black people because he was gay. And he still did what he needed to do, which was live his best life. He was still a crusader for civil rights. He was still a playwright, an author, an orator, an activist. He was still all of those things. And I think he lived a very full, authentic life, independent of what anyone ever thought about him. Someone else who I think of is Paul Robeson as well, who again used a lot of his art and his craft and his talent to be an activist, and had it all taken away from him. Life was completely turned upside down, yet he still held steadfast to who he was and what he believed in, and I think that's pretty awesome. Those are the first two people that come to mind.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.